Imagine taking a few years out of your career to raise children, care for someone, recover your health, or just live a different chapter of your life. Now imagine try to get back and feeling like everything you built before has somehow expired. That's the reality for millions of women. Not because they've lost their capability, just because we still treat career breaks like career endings. Welcome to The Heels in the Hierarchy, the podcast for women building careers, leading teams, and navigating everything that comes with it. I'm SJ.
And I'm Pegsy. And today we're talking about something that affects far more women than we openly acknowledge. What happens when you step away from your career and try to come back? We're using a brilliant TED Talk as our starting point, Carol Fishman Cohen, who introduces the amazing idea of relaunchers rather than our convoluted term of women returners. We love that framing because it completely shifts the narrative. This isn't about going backwards, it's about relaunching forward. The TED Talk was originally recorded in 2015, but we felt that the challenges and concept that it covered are no less relevant to today. I think one of the most striking things from the talk was how common career breaks actually are, and yet how quietly they're still treated in the workplace. Particularly in the UK, we say that we support flexible career breaks and work-life balance, but culturally, I think we still reward the same things that we always have. Consistency, visibility, uninterrupted career progression. A nice, neat CV without any gaps feels like the gold standard, even though most people's lives, and particularly for women workers, don't follow that pattern at all. For women, stepping away from work is often not a deviation, it's a completely normal part of life. Whether that's raising children, caring for family, navigating their own health, simply reassessing priorities, elder care, whatever it is, these are not just at the edge of our working lives. These are mainstream experiences.
Yeah. And yet I think the way that those experiences show up on paper, it's seen as a gap. So when you're writing or you're putting an interview, you have to put there's an actual word that says gap in employment, explain.
Yeah.
And that word alone is incredibly telling. So we just talked at the beginning, you said the word, we use it quite a lot in our podcast around reframing narratives.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we just love that TED Talk, because it frames and reframes that, especially when you think about gaps, because it frames that time as an absence rather than actually recognizing of what's happening. It's not a gap of doing nothing. There's always a reason. There's always something going on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is how quickly that gap actually becomes a focal point in interviews and decision making. I don't think the years of experience before that happened, not the capability, not the track record, just the break. So it becomes the topic of the conversation. And then with that comes a whole set of assumptions and that's the problem, the assumptions, isn't it? And we talk about the narrative. So the skills have faded, the confidence has dropped. And this is obviously a perspective, but the ambition might have shifted. But in reality, I think many, many women come back from those periods, and we women's podcast, so we talk about that perspective, but are very different. So we just did an episode on elder care and that complexities, and this then just highlighted. I love the fact she calls it relaunchers, because actually part of it she discusses about what's your passions, what's your drives, your experience, and here when you're going to interview, they just think about the gap and what they think you haven't achieved, which is difficult. And it basically your capacity to be able to complete a role, isn't it?
The interesting thing is that we talk about gaps, we talk about breaks, and they've got very, very negative connotations. I think that's such a shame.
Yeah. I mean, imagine being in that situation where people are focusing on your capability. If you've been spending what we literally just talked about, elder care, navigating, managing, shift sorting, they're huge
100%.
skill sets that you can't necessarily teach in the workplace. So actually you're bringing someone that's even further skilled and capabilities are higher than they were when they left.
Yeah.
But anyway, digress. In the podcast, she talks about relaunchers. So if we think about the mindset of the relauncher, the whole idea of being a relauncher, I think is powerful because it actually gives it language for something that is actually missing. So it turns what feels like a hesitant return or a gap into something really intentional. So it's a new chapter, it's a new season, it's a new phase. And I think that links closely to how we think about careers more broadly. We've been kind of conditioned, I don't know if you think this, but I do think that we've been conditioned to see things as quite linear. Like you said about the CV, I do this and then I go do this. That's absolutely not been my experience in my career. But generically thinking, a steady upward trajectory, because in reality, that's completely non-realistic. Different life stages, we talk about it all the time, different things that are needed from us, and sometimes just stepping back is actually the best way to move forward, but in a sustainable way, I think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's where it's impacted in reality through confidence, I would say. We've talked a lot about imposter syndrome. We were talking earlier about the importance of reframing that into imposter phenomenon because it takes it away from some sort of medical broken condition into something that just pops up and occurs briefly or periodically. But confidence is what is the essence of imposter phenomenon. And the thing with confidence for women is that it does tend to operate a different internal sort of threshold that women feel that they need to meet before putting themselves forward. So, for women, they need to feel that they know properly how to do something. They need to feel fluent before they say that they will do it. Men, we know from research, very often kind of try things once and say, yep, I can do that. And they say it with confidence. Well, the thing is, after a career break, that different approach to how we feel about our skills is at a completely different threshold. It's an even higher threshold. I think what's fascinating is that this isn't necessarily about ability. In fact, it's not at all about ability. It's about perception, personal perception mostly. But because we're using words like career break and gaps and women returners, that perception is even more challenging. So, as I say, we know that men are more often comfortable into stepping into something as soon as they've learned it. They do so with, aplomb, but it has a completely different relationship with uncertainty for women.
Do you not think, though, that as you were talking, it just made me think, again, it's negative language, but also what we're not praising or we haven't noticed is the amazing empowerment of adaptability that we have. Like, we have every episode of what we're talking about, obviously now we're talking about relaunchers, we are adapting to the landscape, whatever we are given, whether we've got a choice about it or not. And yet, that's exactly what leadership is about, is you're adapting to your environment, adapting to the human, your workforce, having to adapt to different personalities, adapting to people's learning styles, adapting to timeframes and deadlines. And yet we're seeing that we have to justify that in an interview. And the difference becomes, I think, more pronounced after time, I think, from the workplace. So the shift really comes from quickly into out of date. So, or I need to catch up or underlying experience, but it's absolutely there. So what happens is that women do hold back. They're waiting to feel ready, which never happens, while the opportunities to rebuild that confidence only really comes through whilst you're doing. So I'm a doer, so I feel that the tension around confidence and when you're going to relaunch is it's just, I think, byproduct. But I really love the concept of what she was talking about in the TED Talk about thinking creatively, and that reframing was really healthy, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. And I think some of the reason for it is that when you look at how this plays out in the UK specifically, there's a bit of a gap between policy and practice that also feeds into the am I ready, am I good enough, that we just sort of want to push to reframe.
And also, if you had a bad interview
Yeah.
with either other women or other perceptions or even men, it's going to make your confidence impact your next interview, surely.
But also that point about interviewing is really key, because good recruiters look for the potential in somebody. They know that somebody coming into a role isn't fully formed in their ability to do the role. If they can do the job standing on their head, don't give it to them.
They should be doing
You're being unfair to them because they can never achieve their potential. They've already reached it, and that needs to be developmental and challenging. So I think, and we miss that when we think about women returners, and potentially because of the language that we use, because of the pigeonholes, we have a different view about a woman returner than we might to a candidate who is coming for a sideways move or more likely a career progression move.
Yeah.
So on paper, there has been progress. Flexible working is more accessible. There's a greater awareness of portfolio careers, of sideways moves, non-linear careers, we would call them. And some organisations are really good at introducing programs that embrace returners. I don't think there's that many of them.
No.
But they are there. They are out there.
Yeah.
In reality, though, access to these opportunities is really limited and often depends heavily on the employer rather than it being a consistent experience across the system. So the relaunching, those opportunities are still relatively limited, and as a result can be highly competitive, which then feeds into that narrative. So while the concept exists, it's still not embedded at scale.
I mean, I don't know many people who have gone into an internship after a long career break. I think internships, in my mind, is still very much, instead of going to college, you're going to go and have an internship to kind of get to know an industry, for example.
Yeah.
So I felt it quite encouraging in the TED Talk with Carol speaking about how she coaches people to think differently about the opportunities an internship can give them, or ask an employer or some way that you've got experience to think about have they explored that avenue, because actually then you can be the success story. I really like how she tried and twisted that, but it does give more opportunities, I think. And if you think about recruitment, hiring processes still tend to prioritize recent experience, which does mean that people who have stepped away for whatever reason, it makes it really difficult to demonstrate what they're looking for apart from the experience that they've lived in. And often recruiters can be blindsided because they're thinking about the job rather than the person.
And actually, to that point, if somebody is a relauncher, it is highly likely that they are more up to speed on their career than somebody who has been in the post, who perhaps hasn't done any personal development because of that fear of failure, because of that concern, am I good enough? They've probably over-indexed on making sure that their knowledge is up to date.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? Sometimes is that you're blindsided by not having, when you're shortlisting, you're not necessarily open-minded to that. You're scoring. This goes back to much data, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if someone's presenting to you as slightly tentative or different to how it is, which is just completely understandable if you've not been interviewed in a very long time, or you haven't gone to an interview's change and shift in the way the styles are. people misread people all the time.
Yeah.
So what people may think is tentative is actually just someone processing differently or exploring how they can use their life examples, but it's misread as a lack of capability rather than actually that skill set. And then that's actually, you're in disenabling, I don't know if that's the word, that person wanted to try against, which is really sad, I think. So what you end up with is an actual system that isn't actually explicitly excluding relaunchers, but it's particularly well designed to only recognise those who've got recent experience, recent knowledge of that matter, without actually asking the right questions to get the right information from those relaunchers that, like you say, would have done the research, would have known that, but they've got no evidence in their work, recent work, to back that up. And that, I think that's the gap in terms of helping recruiters potentially think differently about how to question or how to get the right information to evidence that that relauncher actually does have the knowledge.
And I think there's potentially two things there. One is that since they held a post of a particular level or utilising a skill set in the past, does not mean that after the gap, going into a different sort of season of their life, that they can't form again to that level. And that also there's been no personal growth, no skills growth in that same role or sector, but also potentially just in terms of their life skills, their problem solving skills, the project management skills that we talked about in the elder care episode that they've had to learn in a hurry and at scale. So it presupposes that a point in time had been reached and might never be achieved again, which I think is really disingenuous.
Yeah, I really liked her approach of giving ownership to both parties. So asking the job seeker, the relaunchers, to tell everybody that they're looking for a role, be more bolder in asking people, letting people know you're looking, having that element, and also doing the research so you know what you're doing, because you've got the ownership. For the employer to be more open-minded and think about the richness in which employers can, or relaunchers may have, and think about that as an opportunity, because the things like if they come back maternity leave or they've had elder care, all those elements that would take someone out of employment has been and gone. So you're saving that money. They're more mature, both age but life skills. So they're not going to bring all the other elements that may drag into a HR or an issue in terms of work. So that you'll bring a lot more richness and actually save the time and money to the company, because they want to be there. They've had the break. They're not necessarily looking for job hopping. They just want security, and therefore you're going to have the loyalty. So I really like the concept of that element of the value of transferable skills. And they don't disappear because you've been out of a formal role. And we've talked about it in terms of leadership, emotional intelligence, decision making. I mean, or of women generally, I think, because the adaptivity, we talk about it pretty much in every episode. So yeah, I really like that concept of just giving different perspectives.
For me, it's quite practical, really, isn't it? It's about looking at re-entry as a journey. It's not a single step, as is anyone's starting weeks and months in a new role. So much like you would support somebody who is having a promotion or is moving sector, you would start incrementally. From an organizational perspective, this is a huge opportunity. What you're getting is incredibly experienced and, as you said, enthusiastic staff. You've got a capable talent pool sitting there for the taking. And yet, how often do we have hard to fill roles? How often do we have sectors that just struggle to attract and retain people? However, leaning into that, it requires some intentional shifts from organizations. The shifts are things like how potential is assessed, how onboarding and induction is structured, and how those non-linear careers are understood.
Ultimately, it isn't about doing something nice for people returning to work. I think from in my experience and thinking about the NHS, there's a big term around retire and return.
Yeah.
So you have to have a little bit of a break,
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks before you can come back. Part of that is not just because of the topics we've talked about, but the financial crisis which we're in.
Yeah.
So people are having to work longer. They need more stability. So it's about recognizing value that's already there and actually creating the conditions and the environment as a leader and a manager to actually be used. Imagine if you had someone with so much experience that can multitask, has no ego, is just willing to work, willing to put the effort, has amazing capabilities, that could be in your team and just be a doer and get everything done.
Mm.
And we're not allowing those people through the door because we're looking at CVs and going, there's too much of a gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, we always end with a few things that we wish more women heard. Part of the reason why we use TED Talks in our podcast, isn't it, is that there's so much out there.
Yeah.
And we love sharing things that we are listening to, what we're hearing to. So I really encourage people to listen to that TED Talk. It's a really great reframing around narratives, around relaunchers. If you're one of them, relaunchers that you're seeing yourself in a different light and how much skill set you have. Your career is allowed to have chapters. Same as your life has seasons and chapters, so does your career. And you're not behind because your path just hasn't been linear. And you haven't lost value either because you stepped away. In many ways, what I'd love for our listeners is you've actually added to it. Even if it's in the workplace, hasn't quite caught up with that or recognized that, that's their problem.
Yeah, I agree. And again, to our listeners, if you are thinking about relaunching your career, or indeed if you're in the middle of trying to do it, then there are a few things worth holding on to. You're probably more ready than you feel. The confidence will come through doing something and not before it. You know, you had those skills before, you will have them again. And going back to the piece that we said about how women approach learning differently to men, you've already, I'm sure, started to rebuild that knowledge and to adjust. You know, you're not the only one navigating this. It can feel quite isolating, but actually, there's a huge number of women who are experiencing this. So there's a community out there.
I think we talk about it all the time at the end of the podcast, but if you are a relauncher, let us know what's happened, what made it harder, because I think it's great to have different perspectives. Not everything is linear, as we said. We want you to feel encouraged. I hope that the TED Talk also encourages you to have for yourself a different perspective, to think about things differently. And also we're building a community that are very open about different topics. Actually, you could be a really encourager for somebody else to help the community feel less isolated and the connections. So there's something quite powerful about the idea of a relaunch. Like,
Yeah.
I love new chapters. I quite like taking risks, but I think it's around when we're thinking about this as a relaunch, it assumes continuation, not lost. You know, it's not an end and then we've got to stop. It's your chapters continue.
And for me, that reframing, it says that stepping away, experiencing a different chapter in your life, it doesn't close the door. If anything, it potentially opens new doors. The other thing is that on that life journey, all you're doing is you're just changing the route.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's quite imagery anyway. So I don't think anything always looks like a straight line. And we should never, if anyone's listening to this and they're comparing themselves to other people around what a career should and shouldn't look like, that's quite a dangerous path to go on because we're so unique and your skill set is unique to you. The way that you are, the way that you present your skill set is such a quality and a value to offer that please don't compare yourself to what other people are doing and stay on your own path to find what's actually comfortable and right for you. I think that's really important.
I think that with more flexibility, more honesty, talking about these subjects more, it gives a little bit more space for the part of the life journey that we're on. Now, this episode has predominantly been focused on the relaunchers, but if you're listening to this as a leader in an organisation with influence on policy and adapting those policies into meaningful practice, lean into this as well.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
Sounds true.
So thanks for listening to Heels in the Hierarchy. And until next time,
keep your heels high
and your standards higher.